What if the thoughts keeping you awake aren't actually the problem? What if the harder you try to stop overthinking, the more power you give it? In the next few minutes, you'll discover why your mind keeps pulling you back, and the simple shift that can finally break the loop. Think about it. You walk into a room filled with conversations, laughter, music, facial expressions, unspoken rules, and dozens of tiny social signals. Everyone seems to be enjoying themselves, but somehow you feel tired before you've even said much. Then comes the small talk. How's the weather? What have you been up to? Did you see that show? Nothing is necessarily wrong with these conversations, and yet, part of you quietly wonders, is this really what we're supposed to be spending our limited time on? Information is abundant, but true self-understanding is rare. Welcome to Mind of High. Here, we don't discuss superficial tips. Instead, we dissect applied psychology and unlock the mind, original wisdom, and the core mindsets needed to master oneself. If you believe that life truly transforms only when your perspective shifts, hit the subscribe button. Together, we will explore values that transcend the limits of ordinary entertainment. And today, we are going to venture into a place that makes us feel uncomfortable. Instead of sitting down to read, reflect, create, learn, or explore an idea, let's spend 20 minutes watching a video or a conversation. I'll guide you through it. Stay with me until the very end. And what does the answer in the video reveal? Perhaps it uncovers the true way your mind works. And if that feeling is familiar, the more interesting question isn't why you avoid people, but why your mind seems to value something different from the social world around you. The human brain is constantly deciding what deserves attention. In a crowded room, there may be dozens of voices, expressions, gestures, reactions, and subtle social signals competing for your attention at the same time. For some people, that complexity feels exciting. For others, it feels like mental noise. And there is an important distinction here. The issue isn't necessarily that they dislike people. They may simply prefer environments where their attention can move deeper instead of wider. Give them a book, an unusual question, a personal project, or a subject they genuinely care about, and suddenly, hours can disappear without them noticing. That tells us something. Attention is not just about how much information we can process. It is also about what we consider worth processing. This may explain why shallow conversations can feel strangely exhausting to someone who naturally looks for patterns, connections, and meaning. Small talk often has a social purpose. It creates familiarity. It reduces awkwardness. It helps strangers establish a basic connection. But if your mind is constantly searching for substance, the conversation itself may feel like an appetizer when what you really want is the entire meal. And then there is another layer. Social interaction comes with invisible rules. When to laugh, when to agree, how enthusiastic to appear, what subjects are acceptable, how long to stay, who should speak first. Most people follow these rules without consciously thinking about them, but some people notice the rules themselves. Once you start noticing the machinery behind an interaction, it can become harder to simply disappear into it. You begin asking questions others may never ask. Do I actually agree with this? Why are we pretending to be interested? Why does everyone seem to care about this particular status? Why does being popular matter so much? Those questions don't automatically make someone smarter, and they certainly don't make one person better than another. But they can make ordinary social rituals feel strangely artificial. Perhaps that is the deeper issue. Some minds are less interested in performing belonging and more interested in understanding what is real. They don't necessarily want fewer people in their lives. They may simply want fewer interactions that require them to become someone they are not. And once you see that distinction, choosing solitude starts to look less like withdrawal and more like choosing where your attention is worth spending. But once you realize that some people are not avoiding connection itself, another question becomes much more interesting. What exactly makes certain social interactions feel so draining in the first place? One pattern is the pressure to participate in conversations that never seem to go anywhere. Imagine sitting across from someone who keeps talking about a subject you have no real interest in. You smile. You nod. You ask the polite questions. And somewhere in the middle of the conversation, a strange thought appears. Why am I still doing this? The problem isn't necessarily the other person. The conversation may simply be asking for a kind of attention you don't naturally want to give. For someone who craves ideas, meaning, or genuine curiosity, constantly producing polite reactions can feel like performing a role. And the more you perform, the more disconnected you can feel from yourself. The second pattern is even subtler. You start noticing the social performance happening around you. Someone laughs at a joke they clearly didn't find funny. Someone agrees with an opinion they don't seem to believe. Someone suddenly becomes more impressive when an important person walks into the room. None of this is unusual. In fact, social behavior often involves small adjustments that help people cooperate. But once you become highly aware of those adjustments, they can become difficult to ignore. You start seeing the invisible negotiation underneath the conversation. Who wants approval? Who wants attention? Who is trying to impress whom? Who is pretending not to care? And suddenly, what looked like a simple conversation feels like a complicated game. That doesn't mean every social interaction is fake. It simply means that once you notice the game, you may become less interested in playing it. The third pattern is the constant pressure to belong. Humans naturally look for acceptance. We want to feel included. We want to know that we matter to the people around us. But some people become increasingly uncomfortable when belonging requires too much compromise. They don't want to laugh because everyone else is laughing. They don't want to agree simply because disagreement might make things awkward. They don't want to collect friendships just to appear socially successful. And they may eventually discover something surprisingly liberating. Being accepted by everyone is not the same thing as being understood by someone. That distinction changes the way you approach relationships. Instead of asking, "How many people like me?" you begin asking, "Can I actually be myself around these people?" Instead of chasing constant interaction, you become more selective with your energy. Instead of measuring connection by frequency, you begin measuring it by depth. And this is where solitude can take on a completely different meaning. It isn't necessarily a rejection of the world. Sometimes, it is simply a refusal to trade authenticity for belonging. The important thing is knowing the difference. Because choosing solitude can be healthy when it gives you space to think, create, recover, and remain yourself. But isolation that comes from fear, pain, or an inability to connect is something entirely different. And recognizing that difference may be one of the most important things you can learn about your own relationship with other people. And once you understand why certain social situations drain you, the next step isn't to disappear from the world, but to become more intentional about how you participate in it. Start by noticing what drains you. Maybe it isn't people themselves. Maybe it's the noise, interruptions, forced small talk, or the feeling that you have to perform a version of yourself. That distinction matters. Instead of saying, "I hate socializing," ask yourself, which part of socializing makes me want to leave? That question turns frustration into something you can understand. The next shift is learning to stop treating solitude as something that needs an apology. There is a difference between being alone because you're afraid of the world and being alone because you need space to think. One can make your world smaller. The other can give you room to build one. If reading, creating, learning, writing, or sitting quietly helps you reconnect with yourself, you don't have to feel guilty about needing that space. But independence has a boundary. Solitude should not become an excuse to reject every human connection. The goal isn't to become unreachable. The goal is to become selective. Choose conversations that spark curiosity. Choose people who don't require you to constantly edit yourself. Choose relationships where silence isn't uncomfortable and disagreement doesn't automatically feel like rejection. And when you find yourself in a conversation that feels shallow, you don't always have to fight it or escape. Sometimes, small talk is simply a doorway. A conversation about the weather can eventually become something meaningful. The problem isn't that every conversation begins on the surface. The problem is believing it has to stay there. There is another shift that can change how you measure your social life. Stop measuring connection by quantity. A crowded room doesn't guarantee belonging. A long contact list doesn't guarantee intimacy. Being surrounded by people doesn't necessarily mean being understood. One honest conversation can leave a deeper mark than an evening of socializing. So instead of asking, "How socially active am I?" ask something more revealing. Do the relationships in my life allow me to be myself? That question moves you toward genuine connection. Because the healthiest form of independence isn't isolation. It's knowing you can stand on your own while still leaving the door open for people who genuinely matter. You don't need to become more social simply because everyone expects you to. And you don't need to reject people simply because solitude feels comfortable. A quieter life, a smaller circle, deeper conversations, and the freedom to decide where your attention, energy, and presence truly belong. Maybe that isn't withdrawing from life. Maybe it's finally participating in life on your own terms. And perhaps once you stop trying to fit yourself into every social expectation, you begin to understand what genuine connection actually means. You don't have to prove that you're intelligent by avoiding people. You don't have to prove that you're confident by standing alone. And you certainly don't have to measure your worth by how many people know your name. The deeper lesson is much simpler. Some people feel most alive in a crowd. Others feel most alive when they have enough quiet to think, create, learn, and simply hear their own thoughts again. Neither automatically makes one person better than another. What matters is whether the way you live allows you to remain honest with yourself. Maybe you don't hate people. Maybe you hate pretending. Maybe you don't dislike relationships. Maybe you simply want relationships that contain something real. And maybe being alone isn't the absence of connection. Sometimes it is the space where you reconnect with yourself. So the next time you feel out of place in a crowded room, don't immediately assume something is wrong with you. Pause. Ask yourself what your mind is actually asking for. More noise? Or more meaning? More attention? Or more authenticity? The answer may tell you more about yourself than another hour of trying to fit in ever could. You don't have to follow every social rule simply because everyone else does. You don't have to reject society either. You can choose your people, choose your conversations, choose your silence, and choose a life that feels meaningful when nobody is watching. Because perhaps the real freedom isn't becoming someone who enjoys every social situation. It's knowing yourself well enough to decide which ones are truly worth showing up for. And when you finally understand that, being different doesn't have to feel like isolation. It can simply mean you've learned where you belong. Perhaps the real lesson isn't about who handles solitude better, but about understanding yourself, learning what energizes you, what drains you, and which connections truly matter. You don't need to be everywhere or at every social gathering. You don't need to fill your life with endless chatter just to prove that you're connected to others. The real goal is balance. Learn to recognize the difference between solitude that restores you and isolation that slowly makes your world smaller. Choose relationships that allow you to be yourself. Choose conversations that spark curiosity rather than constantly draining your energy. And in everyday life, start paying attention to where your energy goes. Notice which relationships make you feel at ease, and which ones make you feel like you're constantly performing just to be accepted. You may discover that you don't need a larger social life. You may simply need more meaningful connections. That may be what true independence really looks like. Not shutting people out, and not constantly seeking their approval, but becoming comfortable enough with yourself to connect when it matters, and step back when you need space. So, I'd love to hear your perspective. Do you feel more energized by a small circle of meaningful relationships, or by being around a larger group of people? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective might help someone else see their own personality in a different way. And if this video gave you a new perspective on yourself, consider subscribing to Mind of High. Your support helps us continue creating thoughtful videos that explore the mind, challenge familiar assumptions, and uncover the deeper ideas behind the way we think and live. I'll see you in the next video.